No major news today, so let's get straight into the data. Do me a quick favor and like and subscribe and watch the video till the end to help out the channel, and let's get started. So markets pulled back pretty significantly. Looking at fear and greed, you can see we stepped down to a 54, and you can see it here on the timeline. Markets are definitely rolling over. You can see it here on price as well. Strength still in fear, but most of the indicators are still hovering in regular greed. Saw the VIX spike up here today, so we'll talk about that on the charts later as well. And then junk bond demand still hovering in regular fear, while safe haven demand is in greed. Moving over to seasonality, we really haven't been talking about this too much because markets have been basically straight up, but this is a bearish period and we're starting to see that bearishness. Technically, the 23rd is supposed to be the low of the month, but maybe that's just the start of the dip low here as we push into the end of May and June timeframes. Moving over to the earnings calendar, you can see everyone here today did beat on the top and bottom lines. Definitely a good day. And that's really the last earnings that we have here until Wednesday of next week when we get Salesforce. Moving over to the economic calendar, you can see not too much today. Initial jobless claims did step down from 220 down to 215 from expectations, and you can see previous read was revised up a little bit, but generally flat within this range between 2 and 235 or so. Economic data actually came in a little bit better than expected, so U.S. manufacturing PMI better than 50, which was the expectation. Services PMI way better than expectations. New home sales continue to lag. Existing home sales were bad the other day, and now we have new home sales also struggling. Fed balance sheet basically flat, and then you can see those 10-year tips hovering right around that 2% range. Moving over to max pain, you can see total options up around 885,000 now. Looks like we're going to get a finish a lot closer to that max pain. It's down at 527, stock price right around 526. So we're not going to get that max pain finish based on what we're seeing, but put wall here still at 525. So wouldn't expect that to break, which means we're basically at the low of the week. Might see a slight step higher into tomorrow's session. And then you can see put call ratio hovering quite low there at 1.7. Moving over to the charts, this was a terrible day. You can see we gapped up, tried to rally, gave it all back and some, ended up down 0.73, momentum rolling to bearish. This is one of those candles where you typically see a lot of follow through. So you can see one very similar to it here on 4 April. Consolidation, slight pullback, tried to make a run and then gave it all back. Consolidated for a little bit and gave much lower lows. You can see very similar setup here. Consolidation, tried to rally, gave it all back. So you could see that sideways chop like I talked about. Might see a little bit of a bounce tomorrow potentially, but eventually you would expect this to break down significantly further. 21 EMA sitting down there at 518, 55 down at 515. So definitely a big change of trend, and this momentum is definitely accelerating to the downside. So you would expect this to follow through, and in the short term you might find some support in that 522 area. Moving over to the Tasty charts, you can see that same setup. We were right at the upper ATR band. We broke that 8 EMA. Daily ATR stop would be 520. If that breaks, we'll be back into bearish conditions. Momentum continuing to roll towards bearish here. And then looking at that 4-hour chart, you can see we did break into bearish conditions. First time we've seen that in a while. It's been on a little bit of a run here. Touched that 55 EMA on the 4-hour chart. Bearish resistance would be 537. Lowest ATR band there sitting at 523.99, so within striking range, and you would expect to touch that tomorrow. Moving over to the Qs here, you can see very similar thesis, gapped higher and rallied and gave it all back in the mid-session. Almost hit that 144 EMA on the hourly chart. Ended up down 0.45 on the day, momentum accelerating. RSI hasn't broken down yet on the daily chart, but very similar thesis. Seems like this is going to trend lower over time, potentially all the way down to that 21 EMA. You can see these are quite extended between the two. 21 there sitting at 441.24. And we had a very similar candle just like we saw before. So just like here for April, tried to go higher, gave it all back. Eventually that resulted in a much bigger downtrend. Moving over to the Tasty charts, you can see the same thesis. Big overthrow of that upper ATR. That was 457.25. And then we pulled right back to that 8 EMA at 451.83. And then we got a little bit of a bounce from there. Same thesis on momentum. ATR support down at 442. So makes sense why we would get into that zone right around the 21 EMA. And then same thesis here on the 4-hour chart. You can see those ATR resistance sitting all the way up there at 465.63. And then that lowest ATR band sitting down at 448.61. So again, you would expect it to get into that zone over time. Momentum not nearly as clear here on the Qs. Tech continues to be a little bit stronger in my opinion, but markets are definitely looking for a pullback over the next few days. Moving over to the Russell and the Dow, these were both terrible. 1.64% and 1.51% momentum almost into bearish territory. territory, definitely breaking down here. At this point, you really just want to watch and see what happens. This could be a zone of support. You got VWAP 55 and 21 EMA. Similarly here on the Dow, you got the 21 sitting in that same zone. This is a zone. This is an area where you could absolutely find support on both of these, but you definitely need to see that evidence. Right now, it's just a first touch. This could absolutely just cut through this and head right back to these lows around 192. That'd be a pretty big move for the Russell, about another $10 lower. And then similarly on the Dow, this could absolutely go much lower. We got here very quickly, and momentum still has a lot of room to follow through, not even fully into bearish territory here. So definitely be patient on these. Seems like the less exposure that you have to tech, the faster these fall. Moving over to the Mag 7, gapped up and rallied right to the trend line and then gave it all back to this trend line. So still bullish conditions on the Mag 7. Like I said, tech continues to do well. It is selling a little bit after hours, but NVIDIA driving this higher as we expected that it would. But are these stocks enough to keep the rest of the markets up? Right now, it seems like they're probably not strong enough. Moving over to Apple and Tesla, you can see Apple was down 2.11%, gave back all of these gains from the last week or so. Momentum stepping to bearish, RSI breaking down. Similarly here on Tesla, down 3.54%, right back to this trend line that's been holding up price action. Critical zone here on Apple as well, 186.81. Critical zone on Tesla. If these break down, there's quite a bit of downside. You would expect Apple to pull back to that 200, down around 180.92, and then Tesla's next support, 167.34. And then if that breaks, you're down to 152.61 in my opinion. Moving over to Microsoft and NVIDIA, you can see Microsoft tried to go higher and gave it all back, 0.82, momentum rolling to bearish. So Microsoft might be participating in this down move, fully engulfed the previous candle. It's right back to the lows from this candle on Tuesday. You can see it's down even more after hours, so not great there. And then you have NVIDIA, obviously the belle of the ball, up 9.32%, massive move, big volume. Trend resistance for that up around that 1100 to 1200 area. And with their massive earnings, they're probably set to go higher in my opinion. It is worth noting it's down just a little bit after hours. It did close above 1,000, so that still looks strong. And like I said, the earnings catalyst is still very powerful there. Moving over to Meta and Google, you can see Meta was down 0.43. Google was down even more at 1.65%. Meta, we're still watching this as a lower high setup. Seems like it's going to roll down from here. You can see this kind of trend that I added from this previous consolidation and then dip. Now we pulled back to that area. It seems like we're probably going to break down again from that zone. And then looking at Google here, you can see it's been on a run pretty consistently here. But now we have a big down day, broke this trend, broke the 9 EMA. Next support would be the 21 down around 170-160. RSI breaking down, bearish momentum here today. So you would expect this to roll down a little bit more in my opinion. Moving over to staples and discretionaries here, you can see staples fell 1.18%, discretionaries 1.62%. Seems like a little bit of an everything sale. That is not great. You can see momentum on both of these, both bearish now. Broke 77.50, 21 EMA sitting there at 76.78, and then your next level support 75.40. So this could still hang in there. It's still technically a bull trend, needs to hold that area there. And then discretionary is looking much worse. We've been talking about this as kind of a head and shoulders. If this breaks down to the 200s, probably going to break through that on this push. And then if that happens, you probably have a lot of downside here in my opinion. So keeping an eye on discretionaries seems like a risk-off market in my opinion. Moving over to oil and gas and technology, oil and gas down over 1% again here today. So this structure is definitely broken. Probably going to push down to that 200 sitting at 144.05. Wouldn't really look at it before that. I do have a level at 145.92, but really the 200 is probably the more important level there. And then you can see even on technology, giving a lot back here today, down 0.81, momentum rolling to bearish. Seems like this is probably going to pull back at least to the 21, down around 205.81. Still very much an uptrend, but this was a big candle, tried to go higher, gave it all back and then some. So that is definitely concerning for markets in my opinion. It is up a little bit after hours, but I wouldn't put too much stake in that. Might have a little bit of a fight at this previous consolidation as well. You can see the volume in there. But to me, that is one of those big candles. And you can again see it on this chart for April was that candle. Tried to go higher, gave it all back. Did have a little bit of a pullback, but ultimately led to more downside. Moving over to oil and silver, you can see oil was down quite a bit, almost 1% by itself. The momentum is not super strong there, but it is right at these lows. If that breaks, it's probably headed down to 72. And then looking at silver, it's had really two very bearish days in a row here. 3.59 and 2.37. Got some trend support down around that 26 area, so about another 50 cents lower, but momentum definitely swinging bearish. Could overthrow those. 21 EMA sitting down at 26.06. Seems like silver is finally pulling back a little bit, and maybe this commodity trade is pulling back with it. Moving over to breadth, we kind of sniffed this out yesterday. We saw it was starting to roll to bearish, and now we've accelerated. So we're definitely in bearish conditions based on breadth. You can see it here on the 20-day. 50-day not quite there yet, but you will expect that tomorrow, in my opinion. Wait to see this get into oversold conditions for both of them. I would say this probably at least gets to the 16 on 20-day. 50-day breadth might get at least to that 32 area. I don't know if we'll get as low as these previous lows here back from April, but this definitely seems like it has more downside. That's a big candle, and usually there's some follow through behind it. Moving over to the dollar, you can see the dollar made a new relative high here on the hourly chart. And on this daily chart, you can see this is getting a little bit more bullish here. We're back above that downtrend line. 21 EMA still sitting there at 105.18. But momentum swinging to bullish, RSI bullish. So if this breaks higher here, that's going to be very bearish for equities. That seems to fit with the overall thesis. Bullish dollar here in the short term, bearish equities. Moving over to yields, you can see both of these got a pretty big move higher here. Still bullish conditions on the 2-year. 10-year still bearish, still hovering below that 21 EMA. But we saw strong economic data. Home sales were still decent, so yields on the 2 and the 10-year headed higher. And that is typically bearish for markets, so definitely something to watch over the next couple days. Wait for this move on the 2-year to culminate. We'll see if it makes a higher high or a lower high, or maybe a double top here, but it definitely seems like it's headed higher in the short term. Moving over to bonds, you can see J&K continued to sell off. We talked about it yesterday. We kind of sniffed it out. It started to look bearish, and now we've got a big follow through here today, 0.37 to the downside. Momentum rolling to bearish, RSI bearish, so see how that plays. That's a lower high setup, definitely not great there on bonds. Now looking at TLT, it is rejecting off of that trend line that we talked about yesterday, so waiting to see that go a little bit lower as yields rise. Moving over to volatility, you can see we did actually dip lower before we went higher. So the low was 1152, well below my 1177 level, but then we spiked higher. We're back above that 1275 area. Momentum continues to swing to bullish. Seems like this is set to go higher. And if it gets a new high here, markets are definitely going to sell off pretty aggressive. So something to keep in mind. We made a higher high here previously. We've now made a lower low. And if this spikes up, that is going to be very concerning. And it's certainly possible based on the price action that we're seeing here. Moving over to my accounts, I somehow managed to stay basically flat. I did have some losses in my IRA, took everything off there, and then my individual account managed to make enough money to balance out and stay just positive on the day. I am in my kind of bearish position here with 2 sets of calls and 1 short dated put for tomorrow. We'll see how this plays, but right now, definitely bearish. You can see my overall delta is minus 79, and I definitely think markets are set to go lower tomorrow. Quick episode today, had to get through it pretty quick because I am traveling today, but definitely bearish conditions. Let me know down in the comment section what you think of those conditions. How much lower are we going to go? Markets seem to turn a corner here today, and where will we end up when this next move is done? Definitely like and subscribe if you got any value out of this video, and make sure you hit the bell so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Of course, none of this is financial advice. This is all for entertainment purposes. Good luck in your trading and have a great day.